Pushpin disclaimer: this story is a work of fiction inspired by emotional and dramatic themes. While it reflects real human struggles and feelings, any resemblance to actual people, events, or situations is purely coincidental. The purpose of this story is to provide an emotional, thought-provoking experience for readers in the USA audience. It is not intended to promote negativity, harm, or unhealthy behavior. Instead, it aims to highlight resilience, healing, and the strength of the human spirit. I still remember that night as if it were carved into my skin, an invisible scar that would never fade. My legs felt heavy, each step a battle against the weight pressing down on me. The hallway stretched endlessly in front of me, dim lights flickering above, and with every movement, a sharp reminder pulsed through my body. I walked out with difficulty, my legs trembling, but it wasn't only the physical pain, it was something much deeper. My heart carried wounds that no one could see, and they made every step feel like 1,000 miles. Hours earlier, my life had seemed so ordinary. I had gone through the day like any other, exchanging polite smiles at work, making small talk over dinner, pretending that everything was fine. But beneath the surface, something in me had been breaking for a long time. Little cracks in my peace, quiet whispers of warning, and moments where I felt like I was carrying a secret I couldn't even tell myself. Yet I ignored them, convincing myself that life was supposed to feel this way, exhausting, uncertain, and heavy. But that night, the breaking point came. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was subtle, like the slow unraveling of a thread you didn't notice until the whole fabric began to fall apart. One moment, I was fine, or at least pretending to be. The next, I was frozen, staring at a reality I wasn't ready to face. It was in that silence, in that suffocating darkness, that everything I had been trying to bury finally clawed its way to the surface. The pain started inside me, emotional at first. A betrayal, a truth, a memory, something had struck me so hard that it felt like my chest couldn't hold it. But then, strangely, it moved to my body, as if my legs themselves were refusing to carry the burden any longer. My knees trembled, my thighs burned, and my feet dragged against the cold floor. Walking became symbolic, a test of whether I could keep moving despite everything weighing me down. The air around me felt too thick to breathe. I remember clutching the wall for balance, pressing my palm against the cool paint as though it could hold me together. My vision blurred, not from tears, but from exhaustion, mental, emotional, and physical all at once. And in that moment, I realized something that terrified me. This wasn't just about that night. This was about everything I had been avoiding for years. All the pain I never spoke about, all the silent nights where I lay awake staring at the ceiling, all the times I smiled when inside I was crumbling, it had all led me here. So I walked. Slowly. Weakly. But I walked. Each step a declaration that I wasn't done yet, even if I felt broken. My legs may have betrayed me, but my will refused to stop. I didn't know where I was going or what waited for me once I got there. All I knew was that I had to keep moving no matter how much it hurt. Because standing still felt like giving up, and giving up was the one thing I couldn't allow myself to do. Before that night when my legs betrayed me, life looked normal from the outside. People saw me smile, laugh at jokes, and carry myself as if nothing was wrong. If anyone asked, I would say, I'm fine, just tired. But the truth was, I had been carrying an invisible weight for years, one that grew heavier each day until it finally began to crush me. I became an expert at hiding. I knew how to mask the dark circles under my eyes with makeup, how to keep my voice steady even when it wanted to break, how to smile at people who never noticed that the smile didn't reach my eyes. I was good at pretending because pretending was safer than admitting the truth. If I let even one person see what I was going through, everything would spill out: the pain, the secrets, the disappointments, and I wasn't ready to face their judgment or pity. Inside, I felt like I was drowning. Simple things that others did without thought, like waking up, getting dressed, walking into a room full of people, felt like climbing mountains. My body often ached without reason, reminder that the stress I carried in my heart had seeped into my bones. But I brushed it off, telling myself I was just tired or overworked. Deep down, I knew it was something else. It was the cost of silence, the toll of keeping everything locked inside. Relationships became harder to maintain. Friends would invite me out, and I would make excuses. Family members would ask if I was okay, and I would change the subject. It wasn't that I didn't want connection, it was that I felt unworthy of it. How could I let people in when I was so broken inside? How could I expect them to understand a kind of pain that even I couldn't fully explain? There were signs all along that something was wrong. Nights when I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying conversations, mistakes, and regrets until the sun came up. Days when I went through the motions on autopilot, barely remembering what I had done once they were over. Moments when my chest felt so tight, it was as if the world itself was pressing against me. These were the quiet alarms, the warnings that I was unraveling. But instead of listening, I kept silencing them, convincing myself I was strong enough to handle it alone. And yet, strength has its limits. No matter how much you hide, no matter how long you pretend, the truth eventually demands to be seen. My hidden struggle wasn't just inside me anymore, it was beginning to show. The fatigue in my eyes, the heaviness in my steps, the cracks in my voice. Even my body began to resist me, as if it had grown tired of carrying secrets. That was the cruel irony. The very thing I tried so hard to conceal eventually revealed itself in ways I could no longer control. I didn't know it then, but every hidden struggle was leading me toward that breaking point, the night I walked out with difficulty moving my legs. It wasn't just a moment of weakness. It was the explosion of years of silence, pain, and fear finally demanding to be heard. The night that changed everything didn't begin with thunder or storms. It began quietly, almost deceptively ordinary. The kind of night where you don't expect your world to collapse. The air outside was still, the moon hung low, and the streets were empty, as if the universe was holding its breath. I had no idea that within hours, I would be walking away, legs weak, body trembling, heart shattered in ways I could not have imagined. It started with a conversation innocent enough at first. Words spoken casually, as though they held no weight. But words have power. They can lift or they can destroy. That night, the words I heard cut deeper than any knife, shattering the fragile foundation I had been standing on. What I learned was not something I could unhear. It was truth wrapped in betrayal, delivered in a tone so calm it almost felt cruel. I remember the room vividly. The dim yellow light of a single lamp. The faint hum of the refrigerator in the background. The walls felt too close, the air too thin. It was in that ordinary setting that everything came undone. Secrets I had never suspected were suddenly laid bare, and the trust one had built over years cracked in an instant. My chest tightened, my hands trembled, and my legs, those same legs that would soon betray me, grew heavy as though they already knew what was coming. The person in front of me, someone I had trusted with parts of myself I never showed anyone else, became a stranger in seconds. Their face was the same, their voice unchanged, but everything about them felt unfamiliar. I kept waiting for them to take it back, to tell me it was a mistake, to laugh and say I had misunderstood. But no such mercy came. The silence after their confession was louder than any scream I had ever heard. I tried to speak, but no words formed. My throat was tight, my mouth dry. All I could do was stare, searching for the person I thought I knew, wondering how I could have been so blind. My mind raced with questions. When did this start? How long have they been hiding it? Was I ever enough? But the answers wouldn't matter. What was broken couldn't be undone. And then came the moment I knew I had to leave. It wasn't dramatic. There was no yelling, no slammed doors, no storm of chaos. It was quieter, sadder. I simply stood, though even standing felt like a battle. My knees wobbled, my feet resisted, but I forced myself up. Every part of me screamed to collapse, to give in to the devastation, but something stronger inside pushed me toward the door. That was when I felt the weakness set in, the trembling, the heaviness, the ache in my legs that made each step nearly impossible. It was as if my body itself didn't want to let go, as though it was holding on even when my heart knew it was time to walk away. That night, the unexpected became my reality. I wasn't just leaving a room, I was leaving behind a version of myself I would never be again. That night didn't end when I walked out of the room. In many ways, it had only just begun. The darkness outside seemed thicker than usual, wrapping itself around me like a suffocating blanket. Every sound, the rustle of leaves, the distant bark of a dog, Even the hum of streetlights felt magnified, as though the world was whispering secrets meant only for me. Secrets I didn't want to hear. But the loudest whispers weren't from the world outside. They came from inside my own mind. Words replayed over and over, the confession I had just heard twisting itself into new shapes, sharper each time. Was it ever real? How long have I been living a lie? Why didn't I see it coming? My thoughts chased me like shadows, hissing doubts and taunts until I could barely think straight. There's something cruel about betrayal. It doesn't just break your trust in another person, it breaks your trust in yourself. I had always believed I could sense when something was wrong, that I knew the people closest to me. But that night, I realized how wrong I had been. And in that realization, a deeper pain grew. If I couldn't even trust myself, who could I ever trust again? I walked slowly down the street, my legs trembling, every step heavier than the last. Streetlights cast long, distorted shadows across the pavement, and for a moment, I felt like I was walking through a nightmare I couldn't wake from. Each shadow whispered its own version of the truth, different, conflicting, but all devastating. My mind became an echo chamber, filled with voices that weren't real, but felt truer than anything I had ever known. The betrayal itself was enough to shatter me, but it was the whispers that broke me further. They crept into my thoughts like poison, telling me it was my fault, that I should have seen it, that I wasn't enough. They told me I had wasted years on someone who never truly valued me, and that everything I thought I had built was just an illusion. In the dark, those whispers grew louder, and I found myself believing them. I wanted to scream, to silence the voices, to drown out the whispers with something, anything, that reminded me I was still alive. But no sound came. My voice was trapped in my throat, swallowed by the same darkness that now seemed to own me. All I could do was keep moving, though each step felt like dragging chains behind me. And then, amidst the whispers, one thought cut through louder than the rest. Leave, before it destroys you completely. It wasn't just about leaving the room I had walked out of, or the house, or even the person who betrayed me. It was about leaving behind the whispers themselves, choosing not to let them consume me. That thought gave me a flicker of strength. Small, fragile, but enough to take one more step. Enough to remind me that even in the dark, even surrounded by whispers, I still had a choice. A choice to keep walking no matter how much it hurt. When morning came, it didn't arrive with light, it arrived with weight. The weight of everything that had happened the night before pressed down on me the moment I opened my eyes. My body ached as though I had run a marathon, though all I had done was walk away. My legs were sore, heavy, each muscle reminding me of how hard it had been just to leave. But the truth was, the pain wasn't really in my legs. It was in my chest, deep and unrelenting, a dull throb that made it hard to even breathe. The room around me looked the same as it always had. The curtains swayed gently with the morning breeze, the sun filtered through the window, and the world outside carried on as if nothing had changed. But for me, everything was different. I lay there staring at the ceiling, numb, caught between disbelief and devastation. I wanted to convince myself that the night before had been some sort of dream, a nightmare that had ended with the rising sun. But when I tried to move, the soreness in my body reminded me it was all too real. Getting out of bed felt like a battle. My feet touched the floor, cold and unwelcoming, and my legs protested every attempt to stand. I clutched the edge of the nightstand just to steady myself. Each step toward the mirror felt like dragging myself through quicksand. When I finally looked at my reflection, I almost didn't recognize the person staring back. My eyes were swollen, red from tears I hadn't even realized I cried. My face was pale, drained of color, as if the truth itself had bled me dry. I tried to go about the morning as if it were any other, making coffee, brushing my hair, pretending that life hadn't shifted overnight. But everything felt foreign. The coffee tasted bitter, my hands shook as I held the mug, and the silence of the room felt unbearable. Normally, silence was comforting. That morning, it was deafening, amplifying every memory, every word, every whisper from the night before. What hurt most wasn't just the betrayal itself, it was the emptiness that followed. I had shared so much of myself with someone who turned out to be unworthy of it, and now I felt hollow, as though they had taken pieces of me I could never get back. The trust, the laughter, the intimacy, all of it felt tainted now. I wondered how many moments had been lies, how many smiles had been masks, how many promises had been empty. As the hours dragged on, I realized the morning after wasn't about answers, it was about survival. I didn't have the strength to untangle the lies or confront the questions. All I could do was breathe, one shaky breath at a time, and try to take each painful step forward. Standing in my kitchen, staring at a half-empty cup of coffee, I whispered to myself, "You walked out once. You can keep walking." And though my legs still trembled, though my heart still felt shattered, I knew I had survived the night. The morning after may have been heavy, but it was proof that I was still here. And that, in itself, was something worth holding on to. By the time the sun set again, I knew I couldn't avoid it any longer. Running from the truth had been my instinct, but I realized the truth doesn't fade just because you close your eyes to it. It lingers. It waits. And if you don't face it, it eats you alive from the inside. That night, I decided to confront what had broken me, whether it meant speaking to them directly, or at least admitting the truth to myself. The hardest part of any confrontation is not with another person, it's with yourself. I stood in front of the mirror, staring at the hollow version of me reflected there. My hands clenched the counter as if I could steady my shaking body through sheer force. Out loud, I asked myself the questions that had haunted me since that night. Why didn't you see it? How long did you ignore the signs? Was it something you did or didn't do? The silence that followed was unbearable, but necessary. Because the truth was this: I hadn't failed. I hadn't deserved betrayal. And I wasn't the reason it happened. When I finally spoke to them, my voice low, my words chosen carefully, I wasn't sure what I was expecting. An apology? An explanation? Maybe even denial? What I received was none of those things. Instead, I was met with silence, with avoidance, with eyes that couldn't meet mine. And in that silence, I found my answer. The truth was clear, not because of what they said, but because of what they didn't. Their refusal to acknowledge the pain they caused spoke louder than any confession could. The confrontation didn't bring closure. It didn't fix the ache in my chest or erase the tremor in my legs. But it did give me something I hadn't had before: clarity. Clarity that what happened wasn't a misunderstanding. Clarity that I hadn't imagined the betrayal. Clarity that the person I thought I knew was no longer the person standing in front of me. And that clarity, though bitter, was a kind of freedom. Of course, freedom doesn't come without pain. I felt my throat tighten as I spoke words I never thought I'd have to say. I can't do this anymore. I can't live in lies. I can't keep breaking myself just to hold on to you. My voice shook, but my heart meant every word. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't hiding behind silence. I was facing the truth, raw and unfiltered. The walk away from that confrontation was harder than the night before. My legs still felt weak, every step a reminder of how heavy the truth was. But there was something different this time, something steadier. I wasn't just walking away from pain. I was walking toward myself. Toward healing. Toward a future that, though uncertain, no longer depended on someone else's lies. Facing the truth hurt. It tore at me, made me bleed in ways I couldn't explain. But it also stitched something back together inside me. It reminded me that even broken, even trembling, even walking with difficulty, I was still strong enough to stand. And sometimes, that is the only truth you need. Healing doesn't come in a sudden rush, it comes in small, fragile steps. After the confrontation, I realized that walking away wasn't the end of the journey. It was only the beginning. The real challenge was learning how to keep moving forward when every part of me still felt broken. My legs still trembled, my body still ached, but now, each step held meaning. They weren't just movements to escape. I was moving toward something new, even if I didn't know what that was yet. The days that followed were some of the hardest I had ever lived through. There were mornings I didn't want to get out of bed, afternoons when the silence of the house felt like it was swallowing me whole, nights when the whispers in my head tried to pull me back into the darkness. But every time I wanted to give up, I reminded myself of that night, when I had walked out despite the weight pressing me down. If I could do it once, I could do it again. So I started small. A walk outside, even when my legs felt heavy. A meal cooked for myself, even when I had no appetite. A phone call answered, even when I wanted to hide. They were simple things, things most people wouldn't think twice about. But for me, they were victories. Proof that I was still here, still capable, still willing to fight for my own life. Slowly, I began to notice changes. My steps grew a little steadier, my breaths a little deeper, my nights a little quieter. The pain didn't disappear overnight, it still came in waves, unexpected and sharp. But I learned to ride those waves instead of drowning in them. I learned that it was okay to cry, okay to feel angry, okay to admit I wasn't okay. For once, I wasn't hiding my struggle, I was living through it, openly and honestly. And with each step forward, I discovered something else: strength. Not the kind of strength that looks powerful from the outside, but the quiet kind. The kind that whispers, keep going, when everything in you says stop. The kind that doesn't need applause or recognition, because it exists only for survival. That strength carried me through the days when my legs still wanted to collapse beneath me, when the weight of memory felt unbearable. It carried me toward a future I couldn't yet see, but desperately needed to believe in. Walking forward didn't mean forgetting. The betrayal still lingered like a scar, a reminder of what I had endured. But scars don't mean weakness, they mean survival. Each step I took reminded me that no matter how much I had been hurt, I was still standing. And even if my walk was slow, even if my legs shook beneath me, I was still moving forward. The long walk forward wasn't about speed or perfection, it was about persistence. About refusing to let the past trap me in place. About proving to myself that I was more than my pain. And with every difficult, trembling step, I realized I was doing something extraordinary. I was reclaiming my life, one step at a time. Looking back now, I realized that the night I walked out with difficulty moving my legs wasn't just an ending, it was the beginning of a new story. At the time, it felt like collapse, like the final unraveling of everything I thought I was. But as the days turned into weeks and the weeks slowly into months, I began to understand that surviving that night had awakened something inside me. A voice I had silenced for far too long. A voice of strength. That voice didn't shout, didn't demand, didn't rage. It spoke softly at first, almost timid, as though it was testing whether I would finally listen. You made it out, it whispered. You're still here. That means you're stronger than you think. And little by little, I began to believe it. The voice grew louder, steadier, reminding me each day that strength wasn't about never falling, it was about rising every single time I did. I started to see myself differently. Not as the broken person betrayed and left trembling, but as the one who chose to walk away. The one who, despite shaking legs and a shattered heart, refused to remain in a place that destroyed them. That decision, that courage, was my proof of strength. And when I finally recognized it, something in me shifted. I stopped asking why it happened and started asking what I could build from it. Healing was not a straight path. There were days when the weight returned, when my legs felt heavy, when memories cut deep. But even on those days, the voice of strength reminded me, this is temporary. You've walked through worse. Keep going. And I did. I kept walking, even when it hurt, even when I stumbled. Because I knew now that forward was the only direction that mattered. The person who once whispered lies into my life no longer had power over me. Their betrayal no longer defined me. What defined me was the fact that I had survived, that I had chosen myself, that I had learned how to stand even when I could barely move. I no longer saw my trembling legs as weakness, they were proof of resilience. They carried me out of darkness, and they would continue to carry me toward light. And so, when I tell my story now, I don't end it with betrayal, or pain, or even the trembling walk into the night. I end it here, with strength. With the reminder that even the weakest steps are still steps forward. With the truth that scars are not signs of defeat, but of survival. And with the unshakable belief that no matter how broken you feel, you can always rise again. I walked out with difficulty moving my legs that night. But walking out was not my failure, it was my triumph. And that first painful step was the beginning of every strong step I have taken since. 13.